you'll just All right. Good morning, everyone. We're going to flip the agenda a little bit and take up the WMATA MHP Park Affordable Housing concept. So, Pam, why don't you walk us through? And we're joined here by our team from Park and Planning. We'll ask.
Yes, good morning. So the second agenda item that we're going to cover first, because we believe it will be shorter, will not require people here for that item to sit through a couple hours of the review of the Forest Glen and Montgomery Hills Master Plan. We have before us an amendment to the MNC PPC FY 19 through 24 Capital Improvements Program and a special appropriation to the Department of Parks FY 20 capital budget. What this proposal is for is to acquire a piece of property that is the WMATA property in Wheaton. And that would require use of legacy open space funds. That money would be transferred from that account to the acquisition non-local park account. That's your amendment to the CIP portion of this. But that transfer in and of itself doesn't cover the complete cost, and so the other part of this request today is to get GeoBond funding for the additional amount, which is about $1.96 million. That GeoBond funding would go into also acquisition non-local parks, and those two pieces combined would cover the funds needed to purchase this WMATA property. Ultimately, the goal would be that this property could be transferred to MHP. We would then acquire an MHP property of almost equivalent size, and the park would be relocated or located from being on Georgia Avenue to being slightly more central, about a block away within the Wheaton CBD neighborhood. But park staff can give you more details on it. But you had a public hearing on it. You had 2 speakers. You had Chair Anderson speak in support, and you had Mr. Maldonado come over and also speak in support on behalf of the county executive, although there was some conversation about future budgets and funding, although that's really not part of what we're discussing today.
All right, Mike, would you like to share the vision here? And do we have anyone from MHP with us? So if whoever among you would like to...
If I could just, before Mike...
Sure, Casey?
There were some things that...
Is your mic on, Casey? I can't tell.
Yeah, there were some things that the county executive said, including in some comments on Bethesda Beach over the weekend, that I thought bore some clearing up. I think that there's been some confusion with the executive branch from the beginning about what is going on with this transaction. This was not an MHP transaction to begin with. This was a proposal that was brought to the planning board by park staff because WMATA had told park staff, we're looking to dispose of this property on Georgia Avenue, and if you'd like it, you need to make your best and final offer or we're putting it on the market. So we looked at that and said, yeah, this looks like a great place for a park. We should go ahead with this. Let's proceed, and we signed a term sheet. Subsequent to that, or about in the process of looking at that transaction, we became aware that MHP was interested in the potential for a swap, but it's really not in any way dependent on MHP being able to move forward or being able to finance a project on that site. The county executive seemed to suggest at various points that we should wait until we figure out whether or not MHP has the wherewithal to move forward on a project. And really, I would suggest that's really not relevant for purposes of our acquisition of the WMATA parcel, because we can use the parcel for a park, and we think it'd be an excellent park either way, even though optimally we'd like to have the MHP parcel in exchange. And B, if and when MHP has the financing and has a project to move forward, we'd like to be able to go ahead and do that without having to go through the land disposition process all over again. So what we're asking you to do is approve this, not only the acquisition, but to pre-approve the swap, so we don't have to get hung up in that very lengthy, time-consuming and sometimes complicated process if and when that project happens, and we hope that it will. I don't know if MHP wants to say anything about where they are with it, but I really don't think it matters, because the important thing is this is a good park acquisition. In fact, it's a great park acquisition.
Okay. Well, you're saying we could look at it narrowly and say, is this a good acquisition for parks or not? And then we can also look at it broadly, because you are asking us to, you're suggesting not a pre-approval, but you've given us a resolution that is to facilitate.
That would be designed to facilitate that. Yes, I mean, certainly if you thought the MHP project was a bad idea, then that's a different story. But I don't. The county executive, I've not heard him suggest that it would be a bad idea to encourage development of an MHP affordable housing project on either one of these sites. The question is, do they have the money? And what I'm saying is, that's not even like, why are we even just talking about whether they have the money at this stage? The question is, do you support that idea in principle? And if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But I don't understand why the executive seems to think we need to resolve that today to decide whether or not to approve the concept so it can go forward in the event that is financially and otherwise desirable.
Can I clarify?
Sure, Mary Beth. While you do, do you have a photo? Can we put up the photo of the
I've got it pulled up here.
Be great just to see the map, because I'm familiar with it, but there may be others.
So I think Casey is correct. There are several issues, and I think that one is, should this property be purchased to create an urban park, whether it's actually finally located there or on a land swap property? And the executive is supportive of that. As we have gone through our conversations with Park and Planning, one of the things that's also been happening at the same time is we've been gathering information for preparation of the 21 to 26 full CIP. We have some concerns just about affordability overall. You've seen the large request coming in from schools, but also the way the CIP was reconciled last year, there's about a $7 million shortfall in highway maintenance funding that you all will want to put back in. I know the executive will want to do that. We have some facility infrastructure failures that need to be addressed in terms of bridges, and we have some public safety facilities that need some significant investment. So we just have some concerns from an overall affordability as it relates to the supplemental portion. If you go ahead with that today, we may end up trying to make an adjustment in parks in the 21 to 26 CIP.
The
But
next
that's a later,
recommended
that's
CIP
a
that
later
comes in
issue.
January, your
Correct.
submission is January 15th, so you're saying you may reflect that by reducing their,
Something in parks later,
their-
yes.
and that is your prerogative to make, I don't,
Correct.
I would,
And you could do otherwise. So you could act on this today, or you could also look at it together when you see the full CIP in January. That's your choice. The other issue about the
can I just
affordable,
pause, but do you have a supplemental now, or is a supplemental,
it's embedded in these documents.
so that,
And if I may, I'm glad you
Right,
brought
'cause
that
the
up.
public hearing was on the
I didn't wanna get in an
supplemental.
argument with the OMB director at the public hearing, but there's no precedent for counting supplementals against an agency's subsequent CIP request. That's not the way this works. If they want to start doing that, maybe that's a good idea, but schools has asked for supplementals within the last year. There's been other agencies. If you want to go down that road, that would be a totally different practice.
I mean, look, I have no, if that's what the executive wants, the position the executive wants to take, I mean, the executive take whatever position the executive wants to take in the executive's recommended budget. And then, we'll just deal with it.
Yeah, I'm just saying, for the record, that would be a radical
Okay,
departure from.
hey, good to hear, good to hear from you on that point. I mean, generally speaking, we try to accommodate great opportunities as they arrive, and we try to keep everybody moving forward. So
Yeah, and our
I would hope that
CIP,
the
we
park
will
CIP
going
isn't
to have to compete against
showing a big
whatever
cut,
else is being proposed.
Okay, but again, the issue that we're considering is a supplemental appropriation to buy the property, and
Can I also speak to the property disposition and housing piece as well? Casey raised those issues.
yeah, well, I do want to, I want to get to that because it's a big piece, and in your letter, you outline a 45-day timeline for the disposition of this property. It's the WMATA parcel from the county to parks. Is that what the timeline is that you're seeking? So it's not MHP, it's just purely from the county to parks.
Right. If I could clarify, Brenda
Yeah.
Sandberg, the real estate management supervisor in the parks. I worked with an associate in the county attorney's office, one of the attorneys there. We've been working together on the contract to purchase this land from WMATA. Once this idea came up of the potential for a land exchange with MHP, we sat down and together we looked through the county code that lays out the disposition process. It appears, what we tried to put in that cover memo is that there are two different ways that this transaction, should everyone decide it's appropriate and to move forward with the land exchange, there are two different ways that's in the county code where certain parts of the lengthy land disposition process could be waived. The first part is if the project is, quote, approved in a CIP, which we believe these CIP supplemental actions would entail, it means that the first analysis phases, which can take 6 months or more often, are not required because it's already been analyzed and added to the CIP. The idea of the exchange, it means the county DGS would not have to offer the property to every other agency in county government, do a 6-month analysis, then go through multiple public hearings on the use because it's being
fair enough since we're buying it for this purpose and we're not buying it for another purpose.
Right.
But I do want to make a general comment. You know, I generally agree with what you said, Casey, but I actually feel pretty strongly that it's much better to build a park on the MHP site than on the original WMATA site. I just think it will serve that entire quadrant of the community better. So I want to say when I support this, which I do, I'm supporting this because it is tied to a land swap. I would think it'd be a real mistake to not do the land swap. I think a park right on Georgia Avenue there will not get nearly as much use as one that's nestled inside of a very dense,
We agree 100%.
community. So let's not separate these too much. I think that the point is they're tied together and they should be tied together because that's the way it really makes the most sense, in my mind.
Yes.
So, thank you. Now, want to talk about the property distribution?
Basically, I would agree with the comments about the property disposition. Having it approved in the CIP shortcuts one aspect. Having affordable housing also streamlines things. There's still one notice thing that I think is still required, and we agree with those concepts. I think the only thing is that while this looks very positive, there's still a lot of information that's not available. MHP and Parks have both said while it's their intent to try to move forward with this, it's not 100% guaranteed. There's a non-binding letter of intent, but it's non-binding. So it's likely to move forward in this fashion. It's just not guaranteed is the only point we would make.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great if the executive branch would help champion this project. I think that's kind of, what I was hoping for.
I think where we come down on that is simply having a chance to look at all the universe. It's a question of the money on the housing side, I think.
But we have no idea what that is at this
correct.
point.
It's premature. That's
Right.
part of it.
I mean, that could be a couple of years down the road. Who knows? Well, actually, MHP is here. So what is the timing on the housing side? Please introduce yourself and turn on the mic.
My name is John Poyer. I'm with MHP. And in answer to your question, yes, we would be several years away before starting construction.
So that's really a non-issue. Whether the finance is there to support this is truly a non-issue. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But if you know this part of Wheaton, I think you know that it's underserved by urban park amenities, and this would be right in the heart of one of the more densely populated, low-income communities in Wheaton and Montgomery County. So to create a first-class urban park amenity would be absolutely fantastic. I think it would be well used and loved by a lot of people, and I think it's, an area of the county that just could benefit a lot from some real public investment, which is why I think the parcel swap is an integral part of the vision. I'm not totally sure I would buy it. I don't think I would necessarily support this if it was just for building a park at the WMATA site, honestly. I think it's a lot better over here. And the fact that it is a swap, it allows for MHP to build an entire new complex on the WMATA parcel and then turn the lights on and everybody can move over from the existing communities, and anybody who wants to, that is, and then they can do the demolition on the existing structure. So I don't know what more you could ask for as far as a strategy to build and preserve affordable housing and to bring great park features to the community. So I guess that's why I was just sort of flustered by the executive's testimony. It seems like this ought to be something the executive branch is trying to lead the parade on rather than, send confusing messages. I'll just, describe it that way.
Yeah, there's no doubt there's been confusion.
Okay.
I think that the executive is very supportive of the urban park. When he first
Yeah.
heard about this, I mean, he's been championing urban parks in other parts of the
Yeah.
county. He was happy to see it come to Wheaton.
Yeah.
In terms of the affordable housing, I think where he's coming from is simply that there are limited pots of money available for everything. And we want to leverage our money as best we can. And without some specifics, it's just a little hard to say for sure 100%, oh yeah, here we are, we can guarantee a lot of money for this project. We just,
Well,
we're not there yet, that's all.
Right, but they haven't asked us to guarantee anything yet, right? I don't think that they have. So,
Nothing in this requires the executive branch to do anything.
well, right, fair enough to say, look, if it's an MHP project, they're likely to seek some financing from the county. We don't know if it's a loan, we don't know if it's a grant, we don't know anything about it yet.
Right, but either
All
the
we-
county will have the money or it won't.
Yeah, so we'll take that up, in the future. All right. Any comments?
I did have something.
All right.
She answered my question so good.
All right, questions have been answered. So I want to just drill down a little bit onto the disposition process. I don't know if Pam, if your memo reflects their request or not. I just wanted to clarify that, because on page circle 9, Casey's letter says that you lay out a timeline. Casey, do you want to? Or Mike, do you want to describe that a little bit? Let's see. Where did I find that?
I can answer that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Again, as Mary said, since the two different aspects of this being in the CIP and being for affordable housing sort of eliminates some of the processes at the beginning of the end, there's still a land disposition process that needs to be gone through once we have a negotiated land exchange agreement that gets all the details hammered out with MHP as we move forward. And the main steps is that the executive would forward the disposition proposal once we have an agreed signed land exchange with MHP, would forward it to the council for their comment. But then it doesn't have to go through another public hearing and review and vote by the
That's the
council.
swap.
That's the swap. That's down the road.
That's down the road.
Right. And then the executive published the declaration of no further need and an executive order, and then it can implement. So that was just outlining the steps that remain in the disposition process
Gotcha.
after it's being added to the CIP by your funding action today and the fact that it's affordable housing. So it's just,
And,
and I'm glad to hear that we've agreed that there's a shortened process available to us as we move forward.
Thank you. And is MHP likely to request the swap at the front end, like right away, or is that also something you'll wait for a couple of years on?
MHP will continue to negotiate with the county on the disposition of the property as we pursue our plans for the new project.
Okay. All right.
I don't know if there'd be anything immediately.
You don't have, you're working on it.
And the letter of intent lays out a staggered swap, as Mike and Casey mentioned, where they could get the land initially, they can build their site, then once they've done demolition, then they hand us the piece for us. And all those details would be laid out in a detailed, legally binding land exchange agreement that would be worked on with the county attorney and MHP.
All right.
So what I would add is that I conferred with Linda McMillan, who is our expert on land disposition, and with the county attorney on, I guess, Wednesday morning of last week, just to confirm that the language in the resolution, the way this is written, they are both comfortable with it. It achieves the purposes of setting things up. In the background, it references affordable housing, but it is written appropriately, and they are both comfortable with it.
All right. Okay. Good. I think we're 3-0 on this one. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Keep it rolling 3-0.
Rolling 3-0.
I think we could be pretty close to it.
Might be.
Until I blow up the Womata.
Well, we're just gonna.
That will be 2-1. I hope. One way or another.
All right. Well, I think we just got to find out about this density, what that means.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think it's fairly conservative.
No, but your memo doesn't refer to the Womata site, just
No,
the county
it's not.
sites.
It's not. I was just making it a little
Well,
harder.
I might have to, if you're going on the Womata site, I might change my view on those two sites.
I'm trying
The
to-
mic is on.
Oh, good. Hopefully, for the millions at home.
They just heard the.
The background.
The background deal.
That's how it works. It's,
See, nothing got done.
yeah, it's publicly.
The microphone's on, we couldn't be more transparent.
Exactly.
I think this is the type of
Right.
decision
Exactly.
making that
We're
should
on the
happen.
mic. Exactly. It's perfectly
Exactly
legal.
right. You know my position.
All right. All right.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We will now move into actually the first agenda item, which is a work session on the Forest Glen Montgomery Hills Sector Plan. This is really to delve into the recommendations on zoning and land use. The plan divides the plan area into 3 different districts. It has a Forest Glen district, Montgomery Hills district, and then something they've termed the Woodside district. So we will start at the top of the plan area, the northernmost part, which is the Forest Glen district. It is defined by Dennis Avenue to the north down to Forest Glen Road to the south. It is home to the General Getty Park, the Forest Glen Metro Station, medical office buildings, religious institutions, and several multi-unit residential buildings, as well as single-family homes. The first property we're going to look at is the Dennis Avenue Medical Cluster. That's actually 3 properties, so that's how the plan set them up. They are on the map on page 69 of the plan.
Now this one is,
But we'll look at the Berkland Medical Center first.
hey, wait, let's go to the, you said 69?
Page 69 is the map.
All right. And that's site 8?
Yes.
So that's both Dennis Avenue, the county-owned property.
Right. In the
And-
plan, they've designated it Site 8, and that includes the Berkland Medical Center, which we've covered first in the staff report, then Doctors Medical Park East, and then the Montgomery County Dennis Avenue Health Center is third. So it is 3 properties with recommended changes to the zoning. For the Berkland Medical Center, the current zoning on the property is R60. It was approved as a special exception for the medical office use. And the recommendation is to change the zoning to a,
Can I ask when it was approved with the special exception? Do you
I don't know, planning staff should,
anyone know when that?
my guess is probably in the,
60s?
yeah, 60s or 70s.
60s is no longer 40 years ago, I'm sorry to say.
Maybe 70s.
I don't know that the 60s were the actual date, but I know it's been 30 to 40 years.
Thanks. All right.
So the proposed zoning on the site is for a commercial residential town zone with a total FAR or density of 1.25. The commercial's at 1.25. The residential's proposed at 0.5 and a height of 75 feet. In looking at the plan as a whole and looking basically at all the properties recommended for rezoning, council staff looked very closely at whether or not additional residential density should or could be provided on these sites, given our recent conversations at the council with the COG housing targets and the need for more housing in the county. So this is one of those properties where there could be additional residential density.
So to summarize it, if I could, it seems like, the planning board's recommendation was, it might have preserved more mixed use, essentially, but you're saying it could be all residential. If we allow that, then we're opening up the possibility of more residential, which is an important goal as well. Is that fair characterization?
Right, and what I would add is, in other language in the plan and in other locations in the plan, the planning staff was careful to say, we are changing the zoning on this property, we're giving it a certain total density, and we're going to give it the same commercial and the same residential to give it ultimate flexibility in redevelopment.
Exactly.
I just looked at these sites and realized that, in fact, more residential could be achievable here if it did redevelop. 0.5 is very small. We don't typically see things redevelop with 3/4 commercial and only 1/4 residential. It's usually flipped.
Now, was it your goal to sort of say, hey, this is a medical office complex and that provides services to the community and there's value in that, so we don't necessarily want to embark, change direction there? Was that basically the kind of the rationale?
Well, yes, and I think that we're also looking at what's realistic. Many of these medical office buildings are actually medical condominiums. We think that there is a strong likelihood that they probably won't redevelop. And so we were not emphasizing residential here because we thought it's really a little bit unlikely. I would say, depending on the size of the property, 0.5 can actually be a very big building. We'll share when we get to the Medical Park Drive some images if you want to see what it could look like at 0.5, 0.75, and 1.0 FAR. But we really don't have any objection to the council staff recommendation for these properties. Flexibility is great. If, for some reason, these medical office condos do come together and decide they want to redevelop and they want to do residential, that would be fine.
But to your point, it's possibly unlikely just because these are services that are going to be needed in perpetuity, and as long as people have to go to a doctor, they're going to have to go somewhere.
Right, we also, we love residential, but we're also very supportive of office uses in the county. They do provide employment, which is an important part of our goal for the county as well. And, again, I think that we don't really know what will happen. We think redevelopment's unlikely, but we really don't have a problem with upping the R to provide flexibility in case something does change.
Okay. So I agree with council staff's recommendation. I'm just not so sanguine that it'll, that there will be residential, at least on those private parcels, but I think it's a good recommendation. Everybody agree on that one? Now, we've just only done Berkland. All right, so let's keep going.
All right, so the next property is the Doctors Medical Park East. We saw this on the tour. And basically the same recommendation that the current proposed zoning is a small amount of residential, and again, keeping in mind these ideas that if the county is ever going to reach a goal of really providing more housing in the county for people, we need to look at it everywhere we can. This provides that flexibility.
Okay.
There is also a transportation piece of this one that other council staff wanted to cover. So,
Hello, Glenn.
Other council staff here. This issue actually occurred to us after the last work session on transportation, particularly with the recommendation from the committee that there be in the plan a full movement traffic signal, protected traffic signal at Medical Park Drive and Georgia Avenue. Medical Park Drive itself, between Georgia Avenue and Dennis Avenue, is actually built to primary residential street standards. It's classified as a secondary residential street, just like every other neighborhood street, but it's wider. It connects from Dennis Avenue, which is a minor arterial, to Georgia Avenue, which is a major arterial. It doesn't have any single-family homes with driveways onto its only access points are to Medical Park, the Medical Park itself, and to the Woodside Townhouse community. And so, reflecting upon this, it occurred to me this really ought to be classified as a primary residential street rather than a secondary residential street. And I think by doing this, you have a somewhat better chance of getting State Highway to approve a signal at Medical Park Drive and Georgia. And I know that the Woodside community is going to be asking County DOT to evaluate a possible traffic signal at Medical Park Drive and Dennis because they have a problem getting out of the community that way today.
Yeah.
So that's the recommendation, is to classify Medical Park Drive, reclassify from a secondary to a primary residential street.
You're saying it's already built as a primary.
It's built to the standards of primary right now anyway. That's right.
Sounds fine. Any, okay, good.
My original right now.
Thank you. That was that.
I thought it was already, to be honest.
Right. Any comment on that one? No, everything's good? Thumbs up.
and do you want to have any conversation about the making the zoning on this property?
I think we're going to agree with your, yeah,
Okay.
same as the last property.
That would move us to the Montgomery County Dennis Avenue Health Center property. This one also zoned R60. It's a public property. It's owned by the county. The brand new health center there occupies about a 0.25 FAR, 0.25 FAR on the
All right, so we're on to the Dennis Avenue Health Center. You said the existing health center occupies
about 0.25 FAR.
0.25 FAR, okay.
And the plan is recommending a total FAR of 1.25.
All right.
So again, like the other two properties you've just looked at and approved, if the density on this property were increased, the residential density on this property were increased, and the county wanted to go in and redevelop a portion of that existing site. Okay, it's quite large. There is a
They have,
buffered area, which is probably stormwater management and maybe forest conservation, but we all sat in the very large parking area.
Yeah.
There could be some surface structured parking there with housing
Right.
above it.
I think certainly my thought, and many people seemed like, why didn't we do this earlier? Why did we redevelop this site without a housing component? Unfortunate, frankly, but perhaps that can be corrected in the future. Okay, and so you have recommended the same here as on the previous two parcels, where rather than limiting the residential density, you allow it to be 1.25.
Correct.
And then with the 0.25 used already as commercial, does that mean that 1.25 is still available or one is available under your recommendation? And a 1.0 on that site, you've calculated that out as potentially 236 units based on an average square footage of 1,250.
Correct.
Okay, I think Councilmember Jawando wants to maybe recommend a different approach. Well, why don't you go ahead and...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Pam, for the great work on the report, and good to see everybody. I've spoken before about the importance of maximizing county-owned land and getting as much potential affordability out of it as possible. And as the chairman mentioned, we all sat on that parking lot and saw the big space there. And there's a couple of other spots that I'm recommending similar action. But I think in this is a unique opportunity, again, when we have the maximum leverage to put language in the plan to recommend even higher FAR than council staff has put in. And I submitted to my colleagues this morning and to the staff. Sorry, it was a little post-Thanksgiving memo, so excuse the tardiness. But
we got it at 9:29 a.m. Who's counting?
Who's counting? Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, you are counting. I think we often forget, or it's easy to forget that about 3/4 of our renters are earning less than 100% of AMI. So we have a lot of people who are struggling and are rent burdened and are housing burdened. And so when we have opportunities like this, I think we want to maximize it. So what I'm proposing would be to go up to 1.5, the CRT 1.5, and then add an additional 0.25 on the commercial and residential, bringing it up to 1.5 also, keeping the height at 0.75. So that would add, based on the calculations from staff, about an additional capability of 60 more units on this site, bringing it up to 295. And then I'd also like to include language that would recommend that we try to achieve 30% MPDU, with 50% being traditional and then 50% being at 50% or below AMI. Again, recognizing that there's a lot of people that need that type of housing. So certainly would love to hear planning staff's comment, but that's the proposal.
Okay. So I guess my question for you, and maybe Pam has worked this through, was what does that, where do you fit that? I saw in your memo the count of 236 is based on a 1,250
Correct. So one way
square footage. We're not adding square footage. We're simply saying you can build more units.
We have adding square footage.
Yeah.
FAR is adding square footage. We have some images of this site if you're interested in seeing them. Again, I want to just be very clear. We love housing. We want more housing. But I think it's important for you to see what that housing looks like on a site. The other thing we looked into is, believe it or not, it looks like a huge parking lot. When that office building, that health clinic, came through for mandatory referral, they actually needed a parking waiver reduction. They have fewer spaces today than our code would require for that use.
That there was no one in them.
And yet,
There was no one in them.
there was about,
Listen, if you were there at an off time, it's possible that that parking lot is full. But I don't know.
So I'm just sort of sharing that if this was to proceed, we would need to look at shared parking. There wouldn't be just parking for the residential use. There would have to be some parking for the health center as well in the new building. So at .5 FAR, and I mainly want you to look at the images. I mean, we can read, the numbers are a little blurry. We could read them to you.
0.5 FAR just of the new improvement?
Yes,
That would
so
be
that
total
keeps
property.
.25 as the clinic.
0.75 total.
The thing that
That's
looks like the house is the new
point
thing.
75 total. So that is
sorry,
a .5 residential building
Right,
on the site.
that one right there
Yes.
is a .5 residential.
And it includes 2 levels of, we're using the slope of the land to do 2 levels of sort of above grade parking. We don't think this area, we don't know that underground parking would really pencil out in this area, so it's 2 levels of above grade parking and the, again, about 3 levels of residential. So that's .5. If we could go to the next one. This is at .75. And again, the tuck under parking, a little bit more of it, and it goes up to about, at the back, about 5 levels. Next. So this is at 1.0 FAR, and there's 2 full floors of tuck under parking. Plus, I think we might have to put a little bit additional parking in the donut hole. That does keep under the 75 feet of height, but it gets to right around the 75 feet of height. If you added more, you would not have, the issue of the step back at the front is partly there because the CRT zone requires a step back if you are confronting residential uses. So if you went up to 1.25 FAR, which we did not model, you probably would have to raise the height limit from 75 to maybe 85 or so. But I think the point we want to make is those are very big buildings. And, it sounds like, 1 FAR doesn't sound like a lot. But when you have a tract of land that's as large as this tract of land, it's actually a pretty big building.
So that is what staff recommendation allows.
That is what would be allowed under the council staff recommendation. You could build this.
Well, potentially that, yeah. And I'm trying to go a
You
little
want to
higher than that.
go, well, you haven't raised the height though, so you want to allow more density. That's why I was asking the question, because we aren't adding,
I think you would probably, if you go to Councilmember Jawando's recommendation, you probably want to increase the height a little bit as well.
because you just
To make it-
nowhere to.
But it's assuming that there's no underground, because you're saying the parking.
Parking doesn't count towards height.
Well, you just said you didn't think it would pencil out, so that wouldn't have anything to do with the height. You think
Right.
under any scenario, whatever the type of parking, it would need to go up
Especially
to
if you're
85.
trying to build affordable,
Yeah.
then
Okay.
the cost of the underground parking can really.
Pam,
Yes, I'm sorry.
do you have any?
So, in looking at this site, not modeling it in quite the same way, but if you just looked at the area of the site, it's over 295,000 square feet of property area. A quarter of that would give you a footprint of around 73,000 square feet. If you multiply that times a 5-story building and divide by the number, like the size of the units we think cover interior space, hallways, everything, we get about 295 units. So in a very,
This is my proposal.
yes, in a very crude fashion of not actually trying to fit it on the property, but saying if you had a quarter of the site times 5 stories, and how many units could fit in that, you'd get 295. Would it look like this? Would it look like something else?
Right.
It could look a variety of ways. It could technically fit, and then you have this issue of parking. And parking does count toward height. It doesn't count toward density. But again, at 5 stories, you are definitely less than 75 feet. I don't know. Do you, to accommodate your recommendation, you might increase it to 80. I mean, I don't.
And then the parking, what you modeled there is to replace parking for the HHS facility as well as provide parking for the building?
Right, we looked at a very low parking ratio for the tenants of the building,
What was
like
that?
0.5.
0.5, that was considered very low.
That is considered very low when you aren't right, at a transit stop. That's very low. And we would have to replace at least some of the parking for the health center.
But you don't know how much?
Nope.
Well, the other variable is there could be a BRT line on Georgia Avenue, and the plan calls for considering putting a stop up here. So, I mean, just speaking for myself, I would say I think you're on the right track. I think what Gwen is trying to say is, just to be realistic, it's going to be difficult to configure in such a way to take full advantage of what you're saying at 75 feet, but there's a lot of unknowns about what will actually be needed for parking for an affordable housing project with that mix of commercial uses, with or without transit. There's a lot of
things,
a lot of variables. So we're supportive of what you're trying to do, but we're just trying to give you a realistic understanding of what the moving parts are.
I mean, if we go up to 80, I think, again, it's going to have to come before you're going to have to see if it works. I mean, we're not deciding the development application, but I think we want to send a message that we want to maximize this spot as much as possible with affordability. I know my colleagues.
Yeah, totally appreciate the recommendation. We talked about this a bit on the bus tour, where all of us, I think, were wondering why we didn't take advantage of this site previously. As we were redeveloping, it seems like a prime area, particularly since it's a future site for BRT and it's a short walk to the metro. Just questions. I was going to ask about the height. I'm glad you raised that. My view of this is we should be maximizing it. The question now, based on the recommendation made by Councilmember Jawando, is kind of on the margin here. It's, do we keep the staff recommendation, go with the recommendation of affordability, and forego the additional quarter, 0.25 FAR, so we don't have to raise the height and raise an issue? I'm just interested, kind of hearing from planning staff and council staff based on the, whether you heard significant concerns from residents on height specifically. I know, if I'm remembering the area, there's townhouses that abut the site. There's some wooded area that separates the, small wooded area that separates the townhomes from the back of the kind of the side parking lot. And then obviously when you get to the front part of the parking lot, you're getting into the single family neighborhood. Could you just kind of speak to that? I mean, I think the goal here is maximize the site. I think Councilmember Jawando has raised the ante from what we were previously talking about, which I agree with, which is to say this is county-owned property. We should be leading with our values here of making sure that we're maximizing affordability and residential units, particularly near transit. And then the question just is, where exactly do we land on the precise height and the precise FAR?
And the massing diagram that they're showing incorporates the standard, as Gwen was describing, the step down that's required when you confront residential. That's why that one side of that massing diagram has that's a very crude drawing. It's not meant to be taken literally, but that accounts for the requirements in the zoning code. No matter what you zone it for in terms of height, it has to meet those compatibility standards.
CRT has to be compatible with the abutting zone and confronting zone.
Yes.
That's what
So, I think our position is, again, we love housing. I think zoning it to 1.5 is fine. I'm just trying to have you be very realistic, which is it may not build out to 1.5.
Can I ask one other question? Okay, so the only other aspect, the way I view it is, and particularly why I am very supportive of the goal that Councilmember Jawando has here, is we control the asset. So we can recommend it to set the kind of message, I think, that the council is sending to the executive branch and that we are sending to the public and anybody who's interested in weighing in of these are the expectations that we have, that it's going to maximize housing, it's going to maximize affordable housing to the greatest extent feasible. And we can control that, right? I mean, it's different than a site that's not county owned that would be more market restricted than we are. My question is, if we increase the FAR to 1.5, does the value, we have obligations for fair market value, we obviously can waive that. Does that have any unintended issue related to disposition of the property?
Not for the county land, but this is where we get into the issue with state land and WMATA's land, which is a totally different story. They have very specific requirements. They have a fiduciary obligation to get fair market value. My understanding of the county's disposition process is that for things like affordable housing, they can relax that.
Exactly.
My question is about,
Thank you.
Thanks, construction type. Just, again, I think it's more about expectations. At what point are you switching here from one type of construction to another? I mean, if we're looking at 80 feet, I think, are you still able to accommodate that with
Starts
more
pushing
affordable
it.
type of construction?
So there are two main construction types. One is when you do a concrete podium and stick built on top of the concrete podium. So I'm going to refer to that as stick built. The other kind is when you use either steel or concrete. Generally 80 feet and above, it's really steel. In fact, in some cases, John, you tell me if I'm right, it's like, or Robert, it's like 70 feet and above, you're getting into steel and concrete. You can do a 2-level podium, which is about 20 feet, and 5 levels of stick built, which would get you to about 70 feet. That's pretty much the maximum for that construction type, which is a much less expensive construction type. If you're getting into steel and concrete, it becomes much more expensive. So again, I think that we can't design the building in this scenario. I think saying 1.5, maybe they would end up swinging it around and taking some of the parking in front of the health center. I mean, there are other ways that a building could be designed. We have no idea of what creative solutions might be out there. So the bottom line is, I think 1.5 is fine. I think that I just want you to be very cognizant of the fact that's a very big building, and it is, it may not end up being built out to 1.5.
Right. I mean, I think we can set a maximum envelope.
It's an aspirational document.
Exactly.
I think that a building that's going to do more than 15% MPDU in this location is also going to probably need a lot of county subsidy. You can't charge $3,000 a month for a 2-bedroom, I doubt. So all of those things are going to have an impact on what actually gets built. It'd be interesting to hear from an HOC or an MHP of what they think that they would do. But okay, yeah.
And I appreciate everyone's input and my colleagues. I think this is the place to push the limit and set the maximum. I mean, when you have the county-owned land and whatever applications we get, obviously there's a lot more smarter architects and developers than I about how they could design this. And MHP, I hope their wheels are turning already as well. And but I think this is where we want to push the envelope and setting that maximum. And so I would amend my request and say that let's go to 80 on the height, and then we'll see what comes in. But I would encourage my colleagues to
So again,
come along.
what we have in front of us is a picture based on staff's recommendation. So Councilmember Jawando's proposing we add an additional 0.25 FAR and 80 feet, not 75. So I guess that's fine.
Comfortable with the.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you. We just got a little closer to reaching our COG goals now.
Well, I mean, no, I don't think we did, actually. That's the problem. Really, that's the issue is
We have to build them.
what's on paper versus what gets built is a big challenge for Montgomery County, in a lot of ways, public and private side. So we will see when an application comes in what they can do.
We sent a message.
We sent a message. Look
We've
forward.
sent a message. We've raised the bar.
There you go. That's where you start.
Got to start with the rhetoric and follow it with reality.
There you go. Okay, what's the next property?
Okay. If we turn to page 5 of the staff report, we have the Fields of Silver Spring. This is a multifamily building complex on Georgia Avenue and McKinney Avenue. It was built in 1947. It's about 8.4 acres and currently contains 221 apartments. It is currently managed under a low-income housing tax credit program that is proposed to remain in place until 2043. The plan recommends reconfirming the existing zoning of R10. When council staff looked at this, and I sort of took it with the view of the things we had talked about and considered during the Veers Mill plan, and market rate affordable housing versus regulated affordable housing, and in light of the fact that we have the Forest Glen apartments that have come forward. So we had 3 apartment complexes that basically line Georgia Avenue on the west side. And you have the Forest Glen apartments, you have the Belvedere, and you have the Fields of Silver Spring. And MHP has come forward and they went through the local map amendment, local rezoning process to rezone the Forest Glen apartments site. It was also zoned R10. It was also built in around 1947. And they wanted to provide more housing and better housing on that site. And they felt they couldn't do it under the development standards of R10 or the but I doubt the density. The density in R10 is quite high. But it does have different development standards. So they had gone through the process of rezoning, and they were given a rezoning to CRT.
R10 is just 10 units per acre? Is that
No, R10 is a multifamily high-rise building that gets 43.5 units per acre.
43.
It's not necessarily a density issue, but it might be, it requires, I think it is 40% open space. It requires certain setbacks. It has a height of 100 feet as well. So it is that idea that what you're building, and it's an old zone, is the tower surrounded by green, which may not be appropriate against these neighborhoods in this location. The point being, when our affordable housing partner decided they wanted to rebuild something that they thought was compatible with the community and that they could actually do it, they requested CRT zoning. So my recommendation is, I think, to look at the Fields of Silver Spring and the Belvedere both as, does it make sense to consider their zoning as well if they want to redevelop in the future? Now we know, given the tax credit program currently at the Fields of Silver Spring, it is unlikely they will redevelop in the next 24, 25 years, but if the plan lasts 30, they may redevelop at the end of the life of the plan.
They might want to start preparing to redevelop before the tax credit expires.
So for this, and because we don't know the financial situation on which that credit program is based, they don't necessarily want to change today their zoning, which might change the value of their property by increasing it. So I'm recommending a floating zone on that property so that it is easier for them to come through and get that local rezoning if they choose to redevelop within the life of the plan. So for the Fields of Silver Spring, council staff's recommendation is to recommend a floating zone that is equivalent to what we're recommending for the Forest Glen apartment site, because they're very similar. And then taken in combination, and we'll just look at these all together, the Belvedere apartments, I'm actually recommending that be rezoned today. They're not under the tax credit program. They were built in 1947. There is a very high likelihood that they will need to be either completely renovated or rebuilt within the life of this plan. So I think that giving them something they can work with, and then require 15% affordable or MPDUs, and also require 2- and 3-bedroom units as part of that.
Which is just notable because the standard is 12.5% in the county, except in places that are very high income, where the law that we passed, which I authored, says that unless the median income is more than 150% AMI or close to that, but when it exceeds that, then it goes to 15% MPDU requirement. But we'd be putting that on this property in exchange for the rezoning, essentially. That's something to note. And then you also add another 5% market affordable, which is 80% AMI.
Correct. Yes.
So looking at first at Fields, existing on the ground today is 221 under the planning board draft or the current zoning, either way. Well, the planning board didn't change that zoning. They could go to 365 without any, that's by right.
That's by right, it would give you 12 and a half,
And that would be 12 and a half.
Yeah. Again, it's a building type.
Absolutely. And then the proposed alternative zoning would allow 586, of which 85 would go into regulated programs, roughly. And the rest would be market, which would be various levels of affordability depending on things at the time. All right, sounds good to me. Comments? I don't know who's first.
Yeah, I'm supportive. At first, I was uncertain about the difference between the floating zone and the rezone, and I think you answered that question about the issue of not wanting to upset the apple cart with a tax credit deal. Rezoning it would have changed the value of the property. We don't want to do that, but this provides our expectation that should a redevelopment occur, and I agree with the chair that the likelihood is that if there was a redevelopment that was interested in occurring, that would take place before year 23 or 24. It would take place like in year 18, which would certainly, we hope, be in the heart of this plan. So I'm supportive of the recommendation and think that the recommendations that you've included make sense, similar to what we did in the Veers Mill plan.
Just generally supportive, obviously. I just had a question about the 20% should be two bedroom. Where are you basing that number on, as opposed to, like, why couldn't that be 25%? Just what's the model you're basing?
At this point in time, without lots of time to evaluate all the details of the different properties, it really came out of what we did in the Veers Mill plan. We had set a precedent there where we looked at these properties that were about the same age, looking at redevelopment and how much could they provide back to the community, and we required 20% there.
Wasn't that based somewhat on what was on the ground already?
It was close to that, yes.
Close to that.
Yeah. It was trying to get close to what they had already been providing, and I'm not sure in this case whether that does that. It just seemed to be what
I think is a good
seemed
precedent.
reasonable precedent.
Certainly, yeah.
And the percentage, the numbers are higher because the units increase, and so if you keep the percentage.
What if? Could we find that out?
You have the numbers.
Okay,
if
what is the number of 2 and 3 bedrooms? And I just, again, I'm glad we did it in Veers Mill, but like you said, we really knew exactly what the bedrooms. And this is different too, because it's not, you're not going from 500 to 2,000, or it's
right. That is different. So there were, very different properties, and even in Veers Mill, the Rock Creek Woods was right there on Veers Mill, and it was much smaller. And then you had the Halpine View, which it was 30 acres. It was a really large property. So it was also trying to keep that in mind, that while this of the 3 properties is the biggest in this plan for these 3 types of current market rate affordable properties, it's still not that large in size compared to what we looked at in Veers Mill.
Great. Staff, do you?
We're figuring out the percent right now, but in the fields of Silver Spring, out of 221 units, 162 are 2-bedroom units. And in the Belvedere apartments, out of 93, 54 are.
Okay, so it's high. So it's higher. It's more like 50%, which
Yes.
is what I thought it was going to be, because this is already an affordable. In this area, this is naturally occurring affordable housing. I would, in light of that, crunch the numbers. I would. Can we go up to 25%? We can. I'm asking my colleagues. Go ahead.
We're talking about a recommendation here, not a requirement.
Right. This would be a requirement.
I thought it was a recommendation.
The staff language is a recommendation.
If it's a recommendation, I'd be okay going to 25%. But I would not want it to be a requirement.
Right. We can't.
Because I wouldn't want to prevent housing from taking place. If it's a recommendation, it would indicate to the planning board that this is something that is strongly desired, and I think most recommendations happen as part of the process, but it wouldn't prevent it if there was a credible case to be made for why it couldn't happen and why it would prevent the development from occurring, I think we need to give some level of flexibility for the development to move forward and not prevent housing for many.
So then
to
can we,
protect a
can we
few.
recommend 30% then, since we're not requiring it?
Goodness.
I'm at 25.
What is?
But again,
what is it now?
it's 50+%.
May I just comment real
Yeah, go ahead.
The issue we want to be careful about is, again, we're looking at fields.
Yeah.
They can build 365 units by right. And if you raise the bar really high on the 586, they'll say, why bother? I can do anything I want to, except for I have to meet the NPDU requirement,
12 and a half.
you know, within 365. Or if I try to go to 586, I gotta, all of that is gonna get leveraged into, 200 units.
Right, and
So it
again,
may or may not work, and it may push them towards something that you
and
get
I'm not
less
talking
rather than more. You
And
know
I'm
what I mean?
not, again, my recommendation is on the percentage of 2 and 3 bedroom units. It's not on the MPDU level. Okay, so just a note.
Oh, understood. It does have an effect, though,
And
on the
Right, I get it over the overall.
on the numbers.
But half or more of the units, I know Lisa's still doing math, but half or more of the units based on those numbers are 2 and 3 bedroom now. So again, we're just thinking about who's there now and
Well,
who's,
there's no 3-bedroom now, I believe.
or 2 bedrooms.
Right, so 2
Sorry,
bedrooms.
2
So
bedrooms.
you'd be adding 3-bedroom as well, which is.
Get a
one
couple of
bedroom.
those, which would be nice. Yeah, a couple of those.
Let's restate the facts as to what's there now. Could we please do that?
I was trying to give you more time. But Casey, you want to
Well,
fill a
while
little
she's
bit
doing that, I just
airtime?
want to point out that the zoning code provides public benefit points for diversity of units. You could say that's a priority public benefit in this case to try to get them there without making it a hard requirement, I think.
Again, it's a
Yeah,
recommendation.
because the concern I have a little bit, if I was the owner of this property and I was zoned CRT, I would consider a by right project and I would build 90 townhouses. I would tear it all down and I would build 90 townhouses, which is 0.5, because you can sell those 90 townhouses for a lot more money. So I think we have to just, not assume. So in a CRT 2.0, the by right is 0.5, correct? So by right on the size lot is 182,970 square feet of development, which could be townhouses.
It could also be that under the R10. We allow all the different building types under the different
Yeah.
multi-zones. So R10 could allow the same thing. R10
Right.
could be 12.5% MPDUs and also townhouses.
Let's just hear the
We
numbers.
can't guarantee what
they'll
they'll
go
do.
25.
So
On the
I know, it's good. Talk it all out. It's good.
This is Lisa Gavoni for the record. Fields of Silver Spring is 73% 2-bedroom, no 3-bedroom units. The Belvedere apartments,
73% 2-bedroom.
yes, no 3-bedroom. And on the Belvedere apartments, it's 58% 2-bedroom, also no 3-bedroom
Yeah.
units.
So that, again, underscores the point.
Sure.
A lot of people in
I think
multifamily.
25% twos is totally fine,
And again, I think this makes the point that our housing strategy really does need to be about both production and preservation. We aren't going to get a new development that's 73% 2-bedroom. So this particular property we're talking about, the Fields, is under a low-income housing tax credit program. It's probably going to stay the way it is for the next 20 or 30 years, and that's a good thing because it gives us maybe fewer units, but a very high percentage of 2-bedroom units. So in this case, preservation could be a very good thing.
what we might really want to happen when this building comes up is that somehow the county or a nonprofit buys it. Once the tax credits expire, right?
Maybe we signal that by doing 25%. It seems like my colleagues are comfortable with that.
I'm fine with 25%
As a
as a recommendation.
For 2-bedroom units.
Yep.
Correct. I'm just telling myself, so thank you. Okay, great. Thank you.
Do you have any comment on the proposed zoning, Glenn?
I think that the proposed, in this case, I like the floating zone idea, and I actually am wondering about whether it should also be used to have the exact same language for the Belvedere apartments, because then we can actually have a little more control when the local map amendment comes in to negotiate for the number of 2 and 3 bedroom units. I think the good thing is, this is my Northern Virginia experience. I think we give away too much zoning. I think we should make people work for it, to be very frank. And I think that when you have a recommendation and it says a local map amendment, there is an opportunity during that local map amendment to do a lot more negotiating.
So my only comment on this is when we look at the difference in units you can get under, for the fields of Silver Spring, given the size of the property, it's bigger. So if you do that local map amendment, you are really getting a lot more units. It's a higher incentive to do it. With the Belvedere, it's a much smaller site. So if we do a floating zone recommendation here, my fear is that they won't undertake that. It's not about trying to get them to the table to negotiate more. They may very well be more incentivized to not take advantage of that floating zone, and then we will be at R10 zoning with 145 units and 12.5% MPDUs. So that's sort of the trade-off. Yes, I know can you get more if you have the floating zone? Possibly, but will they choose the floating zone is the other question. If you rezone them to the CRT requiring 15% MPDUs, requiring a certain number of 2-bedroom apartments, or recommending, a certain percentage of units be 2 and 3 bedroom, then we know that if they redevelop, we're at least starting from that kind of conversation.
Andrew.
Yeah, I tend to agree with council staff. I mean, I'm a little bit concerned about the idea that we know where we want to go here, and while I appreciate the idea of continuing the negotiation, we're also talking about baking in extra costs, and to me, those comments are completely contradictory to the previous comments that we talked about earlier about the feasibility of these lots and how much we can possibly squeeze out of them before they just don't make sense anymore and before somebody is not going to be interested in redeveloping. And so it just seems a little bit, while I do think you want to hold on to as much as you can in order to squeeze out as much as you can, there's a certain point of diminishing returns where if we know exactly where we want to go and we charge a considerable amount of money just to get to the point where we all agree we should go, then we're taking away from the feasibility of the 25% that we just agreed to and the 15% MPDU that we're adding on to it. So I thought that the council staff recommendation for floating zone made sense in the other case because we'd be artificially increasing the price of a tax credit deal that's providing market rate affordable, increasing the property tax. I mean, it seemed penny wise and pound foolish. In this case, it seems like we're holding back on something we desperately want to give, and we're charging a significant amount of money in order to do it, and that significant amount of money could be in the form of affordable units that we're taking away from a possible project in terms of the penciling. So it just doesn't seem like those comments are compatible with the having to do the penciling as we talked about earlier and making the penciling work.
So yes, on the floating zone for the first one, I wanted to say that because that does provide, to your point, Director Wright, that ability to maximize on the larger site. While I like the premise of your statement to negotiate and get the best possible deal, I understand council staff's concern that because it's smaller, do we not get to go up those extra 90 units potentially? I think from 145 or from 93, they could go up to 145 under current zoning, which isn't much of an incentive. This would take them up to 233. And then the requirements here are similar. Could you just restate? So it's 15% PDUs and then 25%.
20 or 25%, that's a committee decision on the units being 2-bedroom, 5% of the units is 3-bedroom.
Okay, well,
Given the size of this property, did not include the market rate unit provision.
would be
It's
difficult.
much smaller.
All right, well, I would just ask, then maybe we can just be consistent and do the 25% recommendation, but other than that, I'm fine with your recommendation on keep.
25% too, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. I think we're with you on that with 25%.
Great. The Forest Glen Apartments is pretty straightforward. As we've been discussing it, it's probably was the basis for our discussion we just had. They came in for a floating zone application. The council provided that rezoning, and planning staff has just slightly increased a couple of those parameters as part of the master planning process to make sure that the vision that they see under their development plan can actually fit on the site. And so you would just be agreeing with that here. And council staff supports that.
Sorry, you just went through that pretty quick.
I know.
You want to say that again? We're talking about the Forest Glen Metro site now.
No, we're Forest Glen Apartments. I'm just reiterating.
Forest Glen Apartments, okay.
It received a local map amendment through the council recently.
Ah, right, the one that we already did, yes.
Slightly increases it. Slightly
Fine.
increases a couple parameters.
Okay,
Ensure that they can meet their goal. Everyone
right.
supports this.
sounds fine. I think we're all agreed on that. Now,
And now we move to the Forest Glen Metro Station parking lot and entrance. It is currently zoned R60. It's about 8.7 acres. We did get testimony about this site. We know that there are residents of the Americana Finnmark that are concerned with the proposed height of this property. But we also received other testimony, almost as much, from other community members that are excited and enthusiastic about the potential for redevelopment of the site and the possibility of having small-scale retail or open space associated with the metro station here. The plan recommends 15% MPDUs be provided for this site. Council staff supports that, and then I would just add the recommendation, I guess, given the committee's direction, the 25% 2-bedroom and 5% 3-bedroom. But if there are any details of things we want to have a conversation about, I'm open to questions.
all right. So, you want to recap this one for us, planning staff? This has been quite an issue for quite a long time.
Yeah, I think that this is one of the central issues of this plan, which is that we feel like there needs to be much better use of the Forest Glen Metro Station parking lot as housing. We have been, as I think you know, talking to WMATA about this project at length. We are looking at 2.5 CRT 2.5 FAR and a height of 120. Again, we would just say we understand the concerns of the community about compatibility, but we do feel because of the existing provisions in the CRT zone that require a setback and a inclined sort of plane of development, that there would be ways to assure compatibility. I think that, we also support 15% MPDUs at this site. We think if you go perhaps to the level of MPDUs that has been mentioned, I think by the executive, of up to 30% affordable units, you may make it a very difficult project to achieve. I would just remind you all that in our Wheaton headquarters project, right near Metro, it was not supposed to be only our office building and an outdoor plaza. It was also supposed to include a residential component, which was to be behind our office building. And that went all the way through sketch plan with the design.
It was a private developer, right?
It was part of its public land with a private developer. It was part of the whole public-private partnership that this entire Wheaton revitalization project includes. And it did require 30%.
30% 30% MPDU.
At 30% at MPDs, but at 50% AMI.
30%
At 50%. And that project turned out to be unbuildable, not viable. So for the foreseeable future, until we...
50% AMI is going to be, less than half of the market. What is a third of the market rate?
Well, if AMI is 100,000 roughly, then 50% AMI are people who make 50,000 or less, and in a market rate,
basically like 95% AMI, right? Like market.
No, market is
100%.
like 100% AMI. 80% AMI is what we consider workforce.
It's more affordable. Than
Right.
Market.
Yes, it's more affordable than market. 80% is workforce, and 65% is what we have for MPDUs.
So this proposal was that a third of the build units in the build, 30% of the units would pay half, essentially, the market rate.
Right, and basically the project isn't happening, and it's going to be a surface parking lot for the foreseeable future.
And is that language requiring that? Where's that? Like, why
That was
can't we
part.
adjust that?
Well, again, and that, I'm only
It's a conversation for
mentioning
another
that.
day, but
I'm only, right, and we can have that different conversation on that. I'm only mentioning that to say
yeah.
that, again, we're playing with a lot of numbers here, and we're throwing a lot of numbers out,
Well, I
and
think
there's
we have
not...
to be careful of wanting to appeal to ourselves, and do everything that makes us feel good, and then not recognize that there are limits on what the market will actually produce, even with subsidies and free land. This was a case where the land would have been provided at very low cost.
It is publicly owned land, but I think one of the things that we did at the request of council staff is we actually did a couple of pro formas to take a look at, this property, and, there are, again, there are so many factors. Depends on the total percentage and the percentage at what level of AMI, and basically if you do a high percentage, you get to a return that doesn't
Right. Well, this
work.
is why I have called that. It's a disguise for trying to stop development. Often, insisting on project numbers that are completely unrealistic, and demanding that is the way that development ought to be, with the benefit to the advocate of getting no development whatsoever, which is really what they want. And like, we can't do that. Like, that's not tenable. It doesn't help anybody.
Circle 1 has the pro formas in your packet, if you look at page Circle 1.
And this is also an extremely constrained site in that WMATA is going to want to put their existing parking underneath whatever's built here. So you have that. It's not just you have to accommodate parking, you're right on top, and it's great that it's on top of Metro, but it also makes it more complicated in terms of dealing, and you're in the impact zone of the subway and all the infrastructure that goes with that, and the bus loop, and it's complicated. So it's hard. That just adds a lot of variability.
I just want to make a quick comment about my friends at the Americana Finmark. I really do respect the fact that when I first got into Montgomery County politics, the proposal was for townhouses on that site, and there was quite an uproar. There was a lot of opposition to townhouses on the Metro parking lot. And times have changed, and the Americana Finmark community is advocating for a lower height of 70 feet. But they're not advocating for townhouses or against townhouses as they might have in the past. So I think that they want to be, recognized for not opposing development completely, and rather seeking something that they feel is more compatible. But I do agree with the recommendation in the draft plan and the staff's plan that 120 feet is appropriate for this location on top of the Metro, and I think that you'll be able to find a way to achieve the goal that is, maximizes compatibility. All right, so we'll go to my colleagues. I think I went to Andrew last time first, so we'll go to Will this time.
Sure.
Thank you. And thank you to Lisa and the team for doing all the analysis. And I'm constantly amazed about the response time. You guys are really good. So this is the definition of transit-oriented development. I mean, this is on top of a metro stop. It is the metro stop. Obviously, we have to work with WMATA. And so, obviously they have considerable control on what type of projects, but there's a role that the county plays. I had staff, and I just wanted to raise planning staff do some scenarios that I think you included in the packet here of the parking requirements, which if you lowered them, and there's been considerable debate around the country for a long time of what are the right parking requirements, particularly when you're on top of a transit station like this. And I think the current plan proposed 50%. If that's correct, I see some nodding. I had asked, would it pencil out if you went to 30% MPDUs with various breakdowns saying half of that go to the workforce housing and half of it go to 50% of AMI of that 30%, and then reduce the parking, right? Would it still pencil out, and would it, to avoid the point that Director Wright was talking about, we don't want to not have this happen. Those numbers did pencil out with a pretty good margin if you reduced it to 35% parking. And again, this is a site on top of a metro spot. I just want to raise it to my colleagues for a discussion, because I think, there's been places where they've done this, and I think that could work here, and it would
Well, that's a key
achieve
question.
double
Is
goals.
35%, is that something that you're seeing on sites like this?
No.
Okay. I mean, that was my reaction, was like, wow, 35% is something the market will provide, but, we can say it pencils out, but if a developer says, I can't get a loan to build a project that only has parking for 35% of the residents, then I can't proceed. And I have heard that. What we try to avoid is parking minimums. We let the market provide less parking if we can, and we have done that in our code, right? We have no parking minimum.
If WMATA showed up and said, we want to do no parking, we would support that.
Right, we would support that.
But we just talked to Alpert the other day. She came to meet me at Wendy's out in Wheaton. All the important meetings are.
It's newly renovated.
It's a very nice. It's a very nice.
Stop there often.
Like to show off all the restaurant offerings in Wheaton.
It's on Michelle.
And their position at this point is they want to replace their parking. She said that if the underpass is constructed and they see more people who live close by walking as a result of the underpass and the other pedestrian improvements, maybe they could support some reduction in parking, but their position is we want to replace it one for one. I agree with you. I don't think that's the way WMATA should look at it, but that is the way they look at it. So the prospects in the near term of them saying, well, it's okay if we basically displace 50 people who are driving to the metro station every day because we're going to have 100 people living on top of it who probably more than 50 of them will take the train. They're just not there. And I would hate to see us jam up the project.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is the point I'm trying to make about the constraints and just sort of the civil engineering issues with the site and the other constraints is that adds a lot of risk to the pro forma, because you could say it pencils out at 10% returns. That assumes everything goes according to what's on this very rough and ready, highly competent and professional analysis done by our crack staff.
Good way to clean it up.
But we're all sitting here in the county council building in Rockville in 2019. We're not trying to actually build the project, and so that's the problem. Is you're asking somebody to go into a project where there's not a lot of room for error, and so when you get to those margins, it's better than what you get in the stock market probably on average. But if you're talking about the kind of risk that comes with going into a project like this, where you don't know what issues you're going to run into when you actually try to design and build it, that becomes more difficult. So I think we would suggest that it's great to push for a higher target for the MPDUs, but particularly on these sites that are not owned by the county, because if it's the county site, they could put more subsidy into it. We don't have that. We can't make WMATA build a project at 30% affordable and say, hey, you guys should just belly up to the bar and put some, accept a lower return, and that's kind of where we're coming from, is that on the county-owned sites, we think you can support a higher target or even requirement because we have more control.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate that. I feel like we needed to raise it. It is an important site, and
Good conversation.
so.
It's important to talk these things through so that we understand, what we're working through.
Okay, it sounds like we're on the same page. I mean, I agree. I think I totally agreed with Councilmember Jawando on county-owned sites. I think the difference here is it's not a county-owned site, and so our ability to control the outcome is significant and quite different. I also think that based on our rough sketches here, it doesn't take into account the easement issues and the other issues that you can't build certain things on top of where the actual metro is on metro sites, and so there are significant constraints to these sites. And so while they are some of the most desirable sites that exist because they are so transit accessible, they're also some of the most challenging sites because they have key infrastructure underneath them. I think the other piece that gets lost in the conversations, one, WMATA is hopefully making money off of these assets to reinvest into transit, which hopefully should serve not just the people living at these sites, but all people, to make sure the transit stays accessible and affordable for those folks who are at the lower end of the income spectrum. I mean, one of the challenges that we face is if we don't make sure that there's the type of ridership that we need at WMATA, that WMATA maximizes the capital assets that they have, we can't keep up the public subsidies, and the challenges that goes and falls on the back of riders, and those riders disproportionately are folks who can't afford it. And so we don't want to be penny wise, pound foolish on that. And I think the last thing on this is, we're frequently talking here about development as a function of how much money is going to be made by the developer, but a big part of the likelihood of development isn't the risk reward, and I think that's an important piece of it too. But the one of the biggest parts of it is financing. And the more restrictions we place, the more standards we place, the higher requirements and strong recommendations we have, the less likely you can get financing. And that's the most common problem in developments not taking place. Isn't because somebody doesn't seem to think that there's light at the end of the tunnel. It's that they can't get the financing to get the project going to be able to make it happen, because most people, just like most people don't buy homes with cash, most people don't do huge developments with cash. They borrow, they finance it. And it's not just whether somebody's willing to build, it's whether you're able to borrow and a bank is willing to take the risk, not just the developer willing to take the risk. So I agree with the staff recommendation. I think that I agree with what the chair mentioned about the folks at the Finmark. I did want to see if it was possible to add one of the other issues, not just the height that was raised, was the access. I believe that the access would be best addressed and most appropriately and cost effectively addressed for one property with the development itself when the site redevelops. So I was wondering if we could include soft language in the plan just to recommend that convenient access to Metro be consideration as part of any redevelopment that takes place at that site.
Convenient access to Metro, ensuring that the property
Yeah, it's
continues to.
Well, it's not only continues.
facilitate
They currently are challenged, and could be even worse if there's redevelopment there in terms of what the access to the site is. One of the things that we've heard is, can we have an extra? Can we do an extra elevator? Extremely costly way to address this. I think at redevelopment, when this takes place, there could be a benefit as part of that. To provide some type of access. One of the challenges to this site is that it has serious grade changes. I mean, it's a very steep slope, and that's one of the challenges. But when you're redeveloping, you can create an access easier, and that could be just not a requirement, just soft language that allows the folks at the Finmark to be good neighbors, and for the redevelopment process to allow for neighborly behavior. just like when two people are building a house and a fence or some other type of access point or a path that might be there, that would be something that a neighbor would have. It's just nothing too strong, but just something that allows for that to take place.
All right, that sounds fine. Well,
I just want to say
do you concur with his?
I concur with that. That's fine with that. And I just wanted to say one other thing. I'm assuming you guys are okay with my colleagues with adding 25% be the 2 bedrooms, just being consistent with where we've been in the previous.
Fine. I mean, what is new development generally? What are you getting from new development these days? This is a new development site. We're not replacing anything that's there. Let's just make sure we're not wildly out of sync with what the market is doing.
25% is fair. We get a lot, mostly studios and 1 bedrooms now, but we do see a sizable amount of 2-bedroom units too. We're just not seeing a lot of 3-bedroom units. So.
The 2-bedroom, 25% 2-bedroom should be workable.
3-bedroom, which is
5%.
5% 3-bedroom. That could be a hitch. It's a recommendation, and if.
Yeah, again, as long as these are recommendations, when we get into a development review process, we understand the council's direction, we can negotiate and try to get as close to this as we possibly can, and we're committed to trying to do that.
Yeah, and I would just say I would love, just as a book, kind of a side note or a bookend or a footnote on the assumption of the parking. I would just like to look a little more in depth. I know you said that's not happening anywhere. I know there have been suggestions that it should happen, but
yeah, I mean, I can tell you I would love to do a parking study of private parking. We've done parking studies of public parking. I would love to do a study of private parking. I was involved with a study of private parking by one particular developer that had properties in Northern Virginia, DC, and Montgomery County. And generally what they were seeing for their metro station properties, and this was also parking provided and actual parking utilization, they were seeing, even at their metro center sites, 0.7 to 0.8 utilization, not provision, but utilization of their parking. So although we have had, again, 1 or 2 projects in the county that have had 0 parking, like there's a wonderful project in Silver Spring that did 0 parking, it is because they are literally next to a public parking garage, and they are able to tell their residents, if you need a parking spot, you can get a monthly lease in the public parking garage, and that worked out, very well.
It wasn't really 0 parking. It was 0 parking on site.
Right.
They still provided parking. The county had to negotiate an agreement with them, I think, for access to the garage.
Yeah, and it's unbundled, so the residents have to pay for the parking.
Yeah.
It's not a given.
Well,
But that doesn't happen in every situation, and so again, I think many projects still feel to be marketable.
Right.
They need to provide, 0.5 to 0.7.
Right, and I understand that. And thank you for restating my request better than I could. That I think we need to study that things are changing, especially and seeing the
If we get 5G, we'll have
hold on.
cars that don't need to be.
Well, that notwithstanding, if that could be stricken from the record, but I just. Doing that study, I think, will be important because we're really talking about what are the costs here, how do we maximize affordability, and having a better sense of that, not just assuming that's the industry standard is the industry standard. Having a little more data, I think that'll be helpful. So maybe we can.
Yeah, we should definitely. I mean, we should always know. We should be ahead of the curve on parking trends, and I think the developer has every incentive to be to minimize parking just because it's expensive, but the reality is that people continue to own a car, even if they don't necessarily commute in it. They may still use it for a trip to the grocery store or on weekends.
Yeah,
that is the current state of affairs, and hopefully that will change at some point soon, but I did want to observe, I think that this conversation about the economics of 50% AMI is really important. I think it's something we all have to really absorb and consider how it applies into various situations. Now, I understand with the Alpine View project, the executive branch basically told the private property owner, you're not going to be able to get access to the density that the council allowed in the master plan unless you do 50% AMI, which is, completely ruins the economics of the deal. That's why I say it's like sometimes it's with good intent and sometimes it's not necessarily on the level. All right, now we're moving on. I think we're in agreement on this one with the 25 and 5.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the parking, I think the key is to disaggregate the parking and to not require minimum parking. We shouldn't be subsidizing and requiring something we don't want. And for a long time, we've done that. I think, we hope that we can make transit more accessible. We can make communities like this one more walkable. And the goal is we can make BRT actually come online and turn that into a serious option for folks to actually move to and from work. If we do all of those things and we don't artificially create a market for cars by subsidizing them with the requirement of parking, and then that will lower it in and of itself without us harming our housing goals by making parking not possible. So that's the mix. But I think the market will allow this. People don't want to have a car if they don't have to. We shouldn't require them to have a car. And so that's, I think, what we're doing here, which makes sense to me.
All right. So planning board has given us their best recommendation on parking here, and we're going with that.
Okay.
Thanks.
So I'm taking the committee is fine with planning staff basically supporting planning board recommendation here for the zoning. 15% MPDU is required and adding the 25% 2-bedroom, 5% 3-bedrooms.
Yeah.
And the language about the access.
Yeah, I have that written down, so we'll add language about access. And we'll move on to the Forest Glen Medical Center, or do you have any more questions?
I would just say, since I have the planning director in the chair here, just, when I think you understand there's a high desire for even better than we're setting as a baseline here when you review the application.
I mean, is there, if they come in, you can negotiate and say, hey, we'll let you, we don't say we'll let you reduce your parking because we allow them to do as little parking as they want.
We try to encourage people to have minimal parking whenever possible, period.
Parking
and we routinely will invite applicants to request parking waivers.
And not only that, I just don't forget the other side of the coin.
And the other
reason
side
is for the
and we also,
increased affordability.
And we also encourage
the parking isn't leverage on that because we
also push on the MPDUs as well.
We don't have any leverage on the parking issue because WMATA has its requirement. Okay, continuing.
Okay, the next property is the Forest Glen Medical Center. Just want to note that under existing zoning, I had copy and pasted wrong here. The current zoning is R60. The text says that it's R60. So the building was built in 1967. It houses several medical offices today with a parking lot. It's on 3.9 acres. It was approved as a special exception as well as the other medical buildings farther up Georgia Avenue. The planning staff has recommended the same zoning for this site as across the Georgia Avenue on the WMATA site. Council staff supports that zoning. And like the Metro site, planning staff has recommended 15% MPDUs be provided. Again, council staff supports that. Given the substantial investment by the county, though, in this tunnel that will significantly improve the marketability of that site and the value of the site when the tunnel is built, I'm recommending that the committee consider adding 10% of the units be provided as workforce housing. Well, I know that, again, affects somebody's bottom line. It also is not as onerous as other types of affordability, but does provide a benefit. And again, include information on a recommendation on 2- and 3-bedroom units.
Okay, so first of all, I have a. To me, this one relates to the properties next to it as well, the single-family housing. And one specific issue is that the plan also calls for the preservation of the vegetated area. Where is that language?
Okay, that language, so it's a couple places, but I think the easiest one for you to probably find is on page 74, under the Forest Glen Medical Center itself. There's B is environment.
All right, so this calls for retaining the canopy footprint of the existing forest,
Correct.
which is not really a forest. It's
Well, I think the idea here was to try to get the open space at the end of the site that's furthest away from the metro. But we all saw the site. It's not in good condition. I mean, I would suggest if you want to provide some flexibility to say that the open space should be consolidated and there should be some afforestation perhaps, but that, you know, there should be some flexibility to be able to
I mean, if you look across the street, Americana Finmark has beautiful trees. You know, they're planted within the grounds. You know, that's a nice example of having tree cover. But
I think the idea was to try to make sure that it was consolidated. I mean, forests perform a different ecological function than just random trees. But I totally support where you're going with this, which is I think we don't want to prevent full use of the site. So there may be a way to write this in a way that's somewhat more flexible that still achieves some green cover and some consolidated space where that can happen, as opposed to just dispersing it or making it, you know, various little islands in a parking lot.
yeah, I mean, you know, whether we can't escape the fact that this is on Georgia Avenue, and I don't know how many people are going to want to sit, you know, in a gazebo at that location, you know. But the plan here is calling for passive recreational features like benches, pathways, tables, and gazebos.
Again, I think the idea was just to get it in one place. And that's true of a lot of these park recommendations this plan, is a lot of it is going to be privately owned space. It's not going to be dedicated to parks, but we're trying to avoid the situation where it's like there's a drib and a drab of a little bit of landscaping that's sort of, you know, in conjunction with the stormwater for your parking, and there is no, you know, there as far as a usable space. So absolutely, flexibility would be great, and as I say, we all saw the condition of the trees when we walked on the site the other day. So I think there's a way to probably write this in a way that can accommodate whatever, being able to get maximum use out of this site without letting that be a constraint.
Andrew?
Yeah, the way this was originally described to me was that the goal was almost historic in the idea of this was a remaining forest of Forest Glen. I think when we went and saw it, it's largely dead. There's a lot of, you know, dead tree species and other problems. It's not particularly well kept. It is not providing a significant public benefit today. I think there could be value in having it as a publicly accessible area, but I think overly prescribing to your point of what it should be and that it has to be maintained as it is. I mean, the status quo isn't good right now. I mean, it doesn't look great. But I think maintaining that so it's not developed and so that it, you know, creates an opportunity. I think that it, you know, it is mid-block, so it's not terribly accessible to folks who are crossing over Georgia Avenue. I think it could potentially serve the folks in the, you know, abutting neighborhood. But I think keeping it and maintaining it as it is, while it sounds nice to maintain it as a forest of Forest Glen, it doesn't look like a beautiful forest of Forest Glen. It looked to me like a state highway median that wasn't well kept and has a lot of dead trees in it, and
to be honest,
has some real challenges.
Residential properties on the northern end, which sort of were late coming in to ask for some opportunity to redevelop, you know, that also made me personally just rethink.
Right.
You know,
well, that's what I wanted to get to as well. How you want to look at all this together.
I don't think anybody really knows whether that could be, you know, sort of consolidated with this, or whether it's just sort of a small missing middle idea on its own, but I think that where I thought you were going with this is to create some flexibility so that if it turns out that can all work together, that this stand of trees is not the difference between that working and not working. But it may
Council
turn out
staff
that
or
that's
planning
the
staff
right,
have a recommendation?
if that doesn't work, it may turn out that leaving this as the space that's open and green is the right way to go. So
About the forest of Forest Glen.
We can work, if it's the direction of the PHED committee, we can work with council staff on developing some language that talks less about the preservation of that treed area and more about that as the development goes forward, open space, required open space, which is required by the zone, should be clustered to the north, and that,
To the north?
right, meaning,
Why would we, so,
because you don't want the open space at the south, right next to the metro
right, no.
entrance.
But what about like having open space more towards the neighborhood and having building mass more onto Georgia? Wouldn't you want that?
Well, I think that's possible, although, again, even, I think part of the goal of this was to be a transition between a more dense development and what was going to remain either missing middle or single family or lower scale development. So having the open space to the north, you could say if you want, within that open space, save any trees that are viable, but not a forest of trees. If there are some trees in that open space that could be saved that are viable, save those.
So
And
let me just make us say, and then I'll pass it to my colleagues. So what I was hoping we would do here overall is have flexibility on that site. If there is something, if there are some trees there that you think would flourish if they were tended to properly, and then maybe that could be incorporated into a future design. But I think we ought to rezone those two properties that are adjacent to this site for more density, and I think we ought to have a floating zone on the rest of the block, at least facing Georgia Avenue. So I wanted to go a little farther. Hopefully my colleagues would agree, but I wanted to go a little farther. And then it seemed like if that was the direction, then it might not be ideal to focus so much on what you preserve on that piece of the parcel versus just generally speaking.
well, I think that is a different take, and if that is the council direction to
We don't know if it is yet, but
rezone the single-family houses or put a recommendation for a floating zone on those single-family houses, it definitely does change the whole sort of picture.
how you'd look at the big picture
Yeah.
there.
One thing I did want to just mention real quickly, just to get it on the record on the description of existing zoning and proposed zoning, what's listed is CRT 2.0. It's actually correct in the text, which is 2.5, and height of 120. So I just want to make sure that we're talking about the correct zoning for this medical center property.
The proposed or the existing is incorrect.
They're both incorrect. The existing is R60, the proposed is CRT 2.5, C 2.5, R 2.5, height 120. And it's correct in the text, it's just not correct in the area
Oh, I
in the
see.
introduction. I just want to make sure, to get it on the record of what we're talking about.
We're talking about the Forest Glen Medical Center, and the language in the text is correct.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll change the other. Thank you.
All right, so again, for my colleagues, I was recommending that we look at this whole parcel together, or this whole block together. The Site 6,
Oh, I have a better slide for this. Hold on. Well, slightly for there.
okay, so what's what here?
So this takes us to the next property on the staff report that we would be discussing, so we're having a larger conversation. This is about the request for the rezoning of 9909 Georgia Avenue and 9820 Woodland Drive to the CRN zone. And here I just put up a little easier map to show you the two properties. They're the two just past the 5 vacant parcels. Those 5 vacant ones are the wooded area, and they are owned by the medical center property. And then the first 2 single-family detached lots that back onto each other, one fronts on Woodland, one fronts on Georgia, those are the 2 properties that have requested the rezoning to mixed use.
The vacant lots? No, the ones that are.
No, the 2 with the houses. Yeah. And then, though, so we had testimony that requested the rezoning. We also had a property owner that lives in the house
You have
that
a little
is,
laser pointer?
I'm not sure. There we go. So I can see.
Oh, yeah.
All right, this property owner also came in and spoke at the public hearing in opposition of the mixed-use zoning, changing the zoning on these 2 properties, because she noted that they make an L around her property. They basically border her on 2 of her 3 sides, and it gave her pause to not really understand what could be built there, how many units could be built there, and what privacy or what level of protection she would have for her largest investment, which is her single-family home, which is this one here.
Now, can I just pause you there? 'Cause, I understand that. Like, what I heard from her that resonated was, boy, what if there's a lot of cars, driving back and forth next to my fence? That would be a bummer. I understand what she's saying. But if we were to also rezone them, and potentially they could come in as, that big property there could purchase them and move things down a little bit, or who knows what they would do, right? That's also a possibility. So that issue could be addressed in that manner, or the owner might want to do it in a different direction. Maybe the owner has no interest in doing that and they want to build something that they own. Anyway.
Well, so my comment to that would be that if this is recommended for a floating zone rather than rezoning today,
That's what
when that
you've
floating
recommended,
zone
a floating zone.
plan comes in, you're going to have a better idea of what is planned for the site when they come in for the rezoning. Not completely. When you're asking for rezoning, you don't have to have the whole development plan for every little piece of it like a site plan laid out, but you have a general idea of why you're requesting that floating zone. And it allows for a public process. So the property owner's request came in after the planning board approved the plan, and in this sense, it would give them time to have a broader and more detailed conversation. And would still allow the rezoning. It would be recommended in the master plan. They wouldn't have to meet certain prerequisites that are required if you're coming in for a rezoning and you're not recommended in the master plan. So even by having that floating zone recommendation is some benefit. It does require the public process, but I think in this case, given the opposition versus the request, if they're weighed similarly equally, then you allow a longer process to determine what is.
All right, so let me just restate what I suggested, was that we proceed with the rezoning on the 2 properties, single family, that border, and then we have a floating zone on the 4 additional properties that face onto Georgia Avenue, with the theory that maybe they would all redevelop together, and maybe you would have an alley access down the back that might come in from
Woodland.
Is it Sherwood? What's the?
Woodland.
So this is Woodland.
Well, no, I'm
No.
Sherwood.
Sherwood.
Tilton.
Tilton. Or who knows where it would come in? I can't control that, or I have no idea. Or maybe those 2 are consolidated with the Forest Glen Medical Center, and the driveway access is much further south. I don't know. Okay, so let's go to my colleagues. Well,
Thanks. All right, a lot there. Just on the forest in Forest Glen, and it is in bad condition, but I was sympathetic to and understood the plan's initial position that we should try to restore that to some sort of, and I won't use my own words, but should be restored to accommodate passive recreational features such as benches, pathway, tables, gazebos, etc. And that would cover most of the green cover requirements. I did speak with your environmental person, whose name is escaping me, Tina, and one of the things that she brought up that isn't listed in the report, it's not appropriate, but it's just that the larger issue of birds, for example, just not having a place to be. and dying, and just so that it spoke to me of the larger environmental ramifications here of just reducing green space. And while I'm not an expert on how many of those trees are viable, I wouldn't want to soften the language from the plan. I think there is some value in keeping what you guys laid out here and trying to see what can be done there, just as a general premise. So I don't know if the chair was making that recommendation. I'm unclear.
I was not recommending that we have strong language in this plan about preserving that particular green area, although Gwen had said that they could ensure that the site would be planted with trees, and to me that would be sufficient, is to provide trees in the area. I think that
So I
it's
think,
a reasonable objective, and I looked across the street at Americana Finmark and I see a lot of trees, so I feel like you could do both.
so I think one of the things, again, if you look at this whole block, is trying to think about it holistically. We had been thinking about it as a fairly dense 2.5 FAR development next to what would remain as single-family houses.
Right.
And we thought pushing whatever required green space and open space that dense development had to the north to provide a buffer between the single-family houses and the more dense development was a good idea. And you sort of got a twofer because there were already existing trees there. You could save whatever existing trees were healthy enough to save, plant more trees, put in, a bench or two,
So can
whatever.
I just, Chair's prerogative here, can I just pause you for a moment? Just want to comment here. While many communities around the country are exploring how to move away from single-family zoning, this is almost doubling down and saying, let's really focus on preserving the protection for these single-family residences that are within sight of the Forest Glen Metro. So to me, that's hard for me to feel enthusiastic about. I feel like the bigger picture here we ought to be focusing on is, boy, these first of all, the housing that's on Georgia Avenue is not in the best condition. It's a tough place to live. It would be better rebuilt with more fortification from the intense noise of the street. And generally speaking, that's not a place where we ought to be particularly doubled down on single-family zoning. That's where I was coming from.
Right, and I understand you. So I'm just explaining that's where our
thank you.
thoughts
Understood.
were.
I just wanted to.
If there is a desire for any of those single-family homes, whether it's the ones facing Georgia or if it's all of them, whatever, to be zoned CRN, which would allow for a missing middle kind of development, then I think our recommendation about having that be a buffer might be a little bit different. And I think, so maybe it's worth, before we get even farther into the how many trees get saved discussion, to talk about if the council's interest is to have all or some of the rest of that block rezoned to CRN to be missing middle.
Well, that was going to be my second point. I was just going the opposite direction. So, one, I think there's just in value in the environmental impact of that area, which is why I led with that, regardless of the buffering nature of it to the single-family zone. My primary concern was the environmental piece. Secondarily, I think I agree with council staff's recommendation on the floating zone because it still allows, it sends a signal like, hey, we think that could be a great spot for transitory development of missing middle near Metro, but we're also not going to force it, and we're going to understand that there's a lot going on here. We have at least one resident. We don't know what the other four on the backside think, and I just think upzoning it at this point would be premature, and the floating zone allows that additional layer of process and still sends the signal that we think this could be a good idea. So that's and it's consistent in my view with what you just stated. So I would not be interested in a wholesale upzone.
So I'll start with that point. I would have been fine with a wholesale upzone had that been part of the full process. I'm a little bit concerned about having the two parcels have new zoning, have the remaining parcels have a floating zone. I think that it should be consistent. I do think there's a benefit to putting into the plan that we see this as a prime opportunity for missing middle housing near Metro, and certainly in keeping with the vision of the overall plan. It would still provide an opportunity for the other residents to weigh in on what the type and use, while not specific to site plan level, some level of community input that they were not afforded to have during the regular planning process. I happen to think that it is an appropriate place to upzone significantly, particularly along Georgia, although I would have been amenable to both sides of it with the transition into the single-family neighborhood there, but I think a floating zone makes sense. I think we should do a floating zone for the full parcel and allow it to work itself
For the whole block.
for the whole block up to Tilton. I think, if we want to include language that, is preferable along Georgia and abutting the other, I'd be okay with that, but I think, to allow for missing middle housing on one side and not to have the connected property participate in that missing middle, if it would make it a more viable project right next to Metro, I think doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And since we're not upzoning it, we're providing a floating zone, we're allowing maximum flexibility to, what could be a very desirable, relatively large parcel for significant amounts of missing middle housing, which we've talked about repeatedly here. So that would be my, pretty similar, if not exactly the same as what Councilmember Jawanda was saying. As far as the green cover, green space, while I agree with Councilmember Jawanda about the environmental piece being more of what I would be focused on than the buffer, because I do agree with the chair that we shouldn't be viewing this as a buffer protecting some from others, which I think is the wrong way to look at these things. I think there are environmental benefits. I just happen to think that the current use, or anywhere close to the current use, has very significant limits because of how poorly kept it is and has been. And so I think providing the flexibility as discussed previously makes sense. I don't think we should call it open green space, though. I think we should provide more flexibility than just that, because that would assume taking down, to create some type of recreational opportunity. So some type of open space and or tree canopy, maintaining public open space and or green canopy, and I would include some type of language to maximize community benefit and access, or something along those lines, so that, to the point that was made before, if there is a change to what is developed here on the abutting site or on the site itself, they could move that to provide greater access and benefit to the community, and it would be up to the proposers and the planning board to decide what that would be and provide opportunity for the community to say what they would see it would be. So I would support floating zone for the full parcel, or the full series of parcel, the full block, and language as I had just described to provide maximum flexibility while maintaining the, and I think we should refer to it not as a buffer, but the environmental benefits, because I think a buffer is the wrong way to look at it. And I think buffer prescribes it to that exact place on the site.
So we'll preserve environmental benefits of, but to be really plain, are you envisioning preserving the footprint of the existing forest, or you're
Not
just
necessarily.
saying,
I'm saying that's possible.
Try to get, well, I think Mr. Jawanda certainly was, but I think you're saying.
I'm proposing that there's an environmental benefit to the 1.25 acres of vegetation and woodlands. Currently, it is not a well-kept vegetation and woodlands. I think in a redevelopment, we would like it to be, but if there is better opportunity to create a better community benefit and a better community use while maintaining environmental sustainability, then we should allow for maximum flexibility and allow for community members to be able to weigh in for that, to allow the proposer to be able to work with community members to figure out, what type of use would be beneficial. But the idea is to maintain 1.25 acres. If it happens to be there, that would make sense to me. There's already some healthy trees there. Clear out the bad stuff, add in some new good stuff, throw in some benches, and call it a day, or maybe move it because there's a better way to do it. I don't want to overly prescribe it, but I do think there is an environmental benefit that has been raised, and I don't want to get rid of 1.25 acres of woodland. I just like it to actually provide the benefits that it could.
Yeah, I'd agree with.
Say something about an afforestation, component that if you're going to move the footprint, that you need to plant, trees such that it actually creates that ecological function of like bird habitat and all those things. I just, I'm not an arborist, but we all saw it. It's dying and it's a mess. So that's why I'm just speaking for myself.
I'm just thinking, we talk about legitimate housing for human beings. It doesn't look like legitimate housing for birds currently. So we got to get it up to standard and up to code. So
I think that we can come up with some language. If what I've been hearing is that you want to add language to say that there should be somewhere on that site about 1.25 acres of clustered open space and/or tree canopy that will provide both an environmental benefit and a public benefit, and leave it at that. And we can, during the development process, figure out what that 1.25 acres is. And that would take the place of any park recommendation on that piece of property, because there had also been language about a 0.5 acre civic green. So again, what I'm hearing, and I'm just trying to repeat it back to make sure I get it, is that somewhere on this site, 1.25 open space green canopy.
I would just, you said and or, I would just say and, including tree. I don't want to provide the option that there could be no trees, which is the way you stated it. It sounds like there could be. But generally, I'm fine with that.
Okay, I think that's probably fine. I mean, I do feel very strongly that from an environmental perspective, the most important thing we can do is put housing near public transportation. And that is really the urgent issue here. And, I don't think that preserving a dead forest provides anything like the environmental benefit of more housing that's walking distance to Metro. So that is why, which isn't to say I don't think there may still be room enough to allow. I'm a little worried that 1.25 acres preserved, across the street from the Metro is a lot.
Let's try to wordsmith this offline. I think we can find something.
What's that?
Let's try to wordsmith this offline.
Yeah, maybe we could do that.
Because I think we can get.
I think everyone wants to have a, comfortable environment around them, and I think we know that trees can be worked into.
We'll come back to you.
Thanks.
I think we had it pretty good. But and then it sounds like it's the floating. I don't want to do your job, but the floating zone sounds like 2-1.
Well, I mean, I'm open to a floating zone over the whole parcel. I support a rezoning of those two parcels, so I think that's 2-1. But I support a floating zone over all of the parcels. Sounds like that's 3-0. So
2-1 not to rezone the two parcels, but floating zone over the whole. Yes, correct.
You never know where you're going to end up when you start out. Yeah, I think this might be a good. How far are we? We haven't got into the complexities of the shopping centers. Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. Why don't we park it here? We've got state legislation at 12:30, and then we've got PHED again at 2 o'clock. So we've got a long day. But this is a good. We got a good ways through. Thank you.
Somebody else had word sign.
Yeah, it was good.